Hey, one of the things we want to talk about is just missions and specifically planning a mission trip. I'm sure 2020 has been a crazy year. There's no doubt about it. And I bet if you have a mission trip, it probably was greatly impacted in 2020. We've heard countless stories about just how mission trips have been radically impacted this year.
Yep.
But good news is 2021's coming.
That's exactly right.
So we want to start talking about 2021 and specifically preparing and planning a mission trip for 2021. But before we talk about details, Zach, let's talk a little bit about even the reason why going through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you could ask that question, is it really worth it to do this and engage in this right now? And we believe absolutely yes. We think it's so important to establish the priority and importance of missions in your student ministry. And I don't just mean missions like a mission trip, but your students being on mission. That should be a central part of your discipleship. And if we look at the life of Paul, for example, he's not a guy who stopped being on mission when things got hard or difficult, right? The mission trumps the circumstances, and I think that's the same here.
I think no doubt. I would love to read Paul 2020 version, shipwrecked, all these things going on, coronavirus, that kind of deal,
Exactly.
and just how it's impacted missions. And one of the things that a mission trip does, obviously, it helps you keep your students missionally focused. Just making sure your students are thinking beyond themselves a little bit. And I know the coronavirus.
Yeah, it's made so many of us look inwardly, whether we realize it or not, but we're thinking about how my school has been impacted, how my job has been impacted, how my finances, how my family, how my friendships.
Just
and
everything.
before long, we're looking so inwardly, and if we're not careful, then we're not loving God and loving others, but we're loving ourselves. And so missions is, again, a reminder that we're called to look outwardly, to love God, love others.
One of the other realities that 2020 has brought, and I was just listening to the news today talking about this, the hurricanes and just everything that's hit our country here in the United States, record numbers. I heard today that they said it's like 1916 was the last time we've had this. But when a hurricane hits a place, what do we see? We see devastation. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, with what's happened in 2020, a lot of the missionaries around the world have had hurricanes hit them. Not necessarily a storm, but the hurricane of 2020, the coronavirus, and it has created some amazing devastation in the life of ministries and missions all around the world. And so one of the things that a mission trip does too is it helps you go be an amazing encouragement to missionaries around the world. Just by being there, your presence, speaking life into them and showing up and saying, hey, we're here by your side. So many of them, their budgets have been impacted. Their ministry, the flow has been impacted. Like your church,
Right.
Things have shut down. We've kind of all dealt with that. So that's another thing that missions does.
Right. And so many of those missionaries, kind of like your churches, are getting back into the full swing. But for many of them, short-term teams are a part of that. And missionaries, many of them would admit that it's such a lonely calling. You're separated and you're kind of on your own. And having short-term teams back will be a huge boost to so many missionaries.
So just encouragement, stuff like that. Let's talk practical though. Let's talk about some details. If someone is sitting here today saying, okay, what do I do to take that first step, to take that next step? What are some thoughts, Zach, on that process?
Yeah.
Zach, first of all, is an expert on this process with what he does with Servant Life. He's in this every day, so great asset to talk with us about this.
Expert is a generous term, but when we think about getting back to the mission field in 2021, I think the most important thing first is to choose a location that's going to feel like a good fit for your group. And what I mean by that is, if you've been to Guatemala 4 of the last 5 years and that feels like a location that your group has buy-in, where they want to be, or they're committed there, that's a great place to get back to. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, you have to read the room a little bit, and if your group's a little bit more nervous, then maybe that's not the best decision to go somewhere to China in 2021 for your next trip. That might be you kind of have to know your group and what they're comfortable with. A lot of churches who maybe alternate between international and domestic trips are saying maybe a domestic trip makes a little more sense for us this year, but you have to pick a location that is accessible for your group and there's going to be buy-in for your group.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with that as well is lowering the bar. I know it's something you say sometimes, just lowering the bar for people and say, hey, how do we start having this conversation? One of the things lowering the bar could be a domestic trip. I don't want to say those are less important than global or global is more important. But if you have people that are nervous, you may say, okay, here's something we can do. I think the thing is activity, just simply saying, okay, we have a plan, we're pushing forward in our plan there. And so one of the things you need to do is assess your people. You mentioned that, read the room. And just simply assessing your people and seeing, okay, what are they capable of right now? What we don't want to do is just live in triage, be paralyzed right now. We want to say, okay, how do we start moving forward? And I say this to people a lot of times. The mission needs to go on. The methods may change a little bit, but the mission continues on. And so some things that you have done may look a little different. You know, you may actually be wearing a mask on an airplane if you're going on a plane. You may have go to some places and have some other realities that look a little bit different. I also think 2021 is going to have some new realities for us. So just lowering the bar, beginning that conversation. Tell us, Zach, about the steps to begin the conversation, though.
Yeah, right. So once you've maybe picked a location and kind of have a sense of what's a good fit for your group, the first important thing to do is to hold an announcement meeting. And I want to specifically call it an announcement meeting and not, a mission trip team meeting, because even that can be raising the bar a little bit. Well, I'm only going to this thing if I'm sure I'm going. No, we're gonna cast vision. We're gonna tell you about the trip, and maybe even kind of withhold the location. Hey, come to the meeting and learn where we're gonna go on our 2021
So a big
mission
wide
trip.
door, like
Right,
everybody
yeah.
come that might be interested in 2021.
I was talking to a church, and he said, man, he was expecting 10 to 15 people to come to this first meeting, and they had over 30 people in the room.
Wow.
They're going to the UK this summer, and the church is so excited to get back to the mission field. So people are ready to go, but we want to, again, lower the bar, give them opportunities to say, hey, I want to learn more about what this trip could look like.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And and obviously once you have that meeting and you start putting a team together, it's really important on training.
Yeah.
This is an important aspect. I was talking with Zach recently. I committed to my son that we would go and we would do 2 weeks backpacking in the Rocky Mountains next year. With a bunch of guys and some friends that we're going to go out there and do that with. And so one of the things we've done is we've already started training for that. So we've already had meetings, we've had prep meetings, we have another one coming up, and so it's a process. And that's a recreational thing.
Right.
Literally I'm doing training and meetings for a recreational thing. Don't you think we should be doing training and meetings for a missional thing? And just really saying, hey, have a strategy, have a plan, put it together far enough out, because you want your students to be ready for what happens on the field. We hear this a lot of times with missionaries. They say, man, kids show up, they don't even know how to share their faith, they don't know what to do, and obviously they're going to work with them and train them. But one of the ways you can support those missionaries, one of the ways you can be a part of really healthy missions and ministry is being prepared when you hit the field, ready to go and have your young people. But obviously, it's not just preparing them for the field.
Right, I was going to say, even in the worst case scenario that your trip has to be canceled this upcoming summer.
That's not happening in 2021. We're not. No trips are being canceled. Don't you know that, Zach?
Worst case scenario, if you spent your time training and preparing your students for missions and evangelism, that's a skill that's going to go well beyond that mission trip, obviously. It's such an important thing. That goes back to establishing the importance and priority of a missional lifestyle and establishing that in your students. So it's definitely a worthwhile thing.
Yeah, I like to look at it like putting tools in a toolbox.
Yeah.
Literally, that's what you're doing with young people. You're putting tools in their toolbox. And one of the things we want to do is we want to teach our young people to live life on mission.
Yeah.
We go on a mission trip, but what do? We live life on mission. We have this mindset sometimes, let's pack our bags, we're going on a mission trip, we come back home and it's done. Well, yeah, that experience is done. The clothes need to be washed and we need to start living life again. But what you want to do is you want to train your young people to say, when I go to school, when I go to my sport team, when I do ballet, when I do life, when I go off to college, whatever, if I'm a Christ follower, the beautiful thing is the kingdom of God shows up when I show up.
That's exactly right.
And so just doing it healthy.
Paul says in Acts 20:24, he says, I consider my life worth nothing to me if only I may testify to the gospel of God's grace. Our lives are meant to be an ongoing testimony to who God is and what he's about. And that's living on mission.
Yeah. So I think in summary, just, how to plan a mission trip. One of the things is just sit down, get a blank sheet of paper out, start saying, okay, what is my strategy? What does the Lord really tell me? Say, Lord, please direct me where you want me to be. Your church may have some connection points already that you want to be involved with. You may be looking for organizations that can help point you in the right direction. But I think it just begins with that desire to say, I want to get my students out of their zip code and onto the field. It's what the Great Commission called us to. It's what we know Christ followers are called to be about. And so we hope 2021 is a great year for you. And we hope right now that you can just begin the process. If we can do anything to help you with that, we'd love to be able to do that, whether it's Servant Life, whether it's our team at YM360. But just know this, what you do matters, and what you do for students as you equip them matters as well.